Protein is a key macronutrient that helps us to promote thyroid health and reduce Hashimoto's symptoms. But although we can look at direct protein intake in research studies, in the real world, we don't eat protein all by itself. And although tracking protein is a great place to start, and you've seen me advocate for it before, if we really want to maximize our progress, we have to consider all of those other factors. So in today's video, we're going to keep it super strategic and practical and help you to understand how you can get the right mix of protein and fat. That way you can feel your best. But before we jump into it, welcome to the channel. My name is Dr. Bodle, and over the years, I've helped thousands of patients with Hashimoto's and hypothyroidism to naturally improve their symptoms, have better energy, lose weight, and find ways to love their life again. I do my best to take information from the research and what we see in the clinical practice, not only to help my own patients, but hopefully help you as well. Healing is possible, but sometimes we have to look beyond the standard approach. So if you like this kind of stuff, it's always a big help if you can give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and also click on the bell so you're notified when I make a new video every single Thursday. Now, as I've said in other videos, prioritizing protein is a huge part of what I try to teach my patients in my practice. Getting the right amount of protein helps to provide our body with the necessary amino acids it needs for healing. It can help us to feel less hungry and prevent overeating. And it can also stabilize our energy levels during the day, which can then translate to better and more consistent sleep at night. Oftentimes, people are getting nowhere near enough protein, and it's really preventing them from making progress and achieving their health goals. To make that problem worse, I find that people with thyroid issues have a higher demand for protein. And if we're maybe not getting enough protein in the first place, and then there's extra that we need, well, that can only compound our problems and throw a real wrench in the healing process. However, we also want to keep in mind that too many changes at once can be overwhelming and oftentimes lead to people failing. So I think it's important for us to target a few key areas and present that to you or my patients in a way that allows us to focus, get the basics down first, ideally start feeling better, and then we can build momentum and complexity from there. So in the spirit of keeping things simple, I will oftentimes give people a protein goal, and that's what we'll work on first. As I've said before, this usually revolves around some sort of protein framework, which isn't always 100% accurate, but it gives us an idea of what we should be shooting for, and then depending on how our body responds, we can make modifications from there. Depending on the patient's symptoms, goals, and knowledge of nutrition, that recommendation might look like 1 gram of protein per pound of ideal body weight, 1.5 grams of protein per kilogram of ideal body weight, or just forgetting the calculations altogether and making sure that they're getting a minimum of 100 grams of protein per day. Now, obviously, those recommended amounts can vary quite a bit from one to another. But remember what I just said. It's a starting framework. It's there to give you an idea, and you're going to have to adapt it to your own needs. For example, I might have someone who comes in to see me and they are coming from a background of a highly processed diet. In that situation, they've never really thought about their food and they've certainly haven't targeted protein. So a good starting point for them might be to target 100 grams per day. It's on the lower end and it probably feels a little bit more manageable to them. But at the same time, I might have a different patient who's willing to try to get more protein, but because of some significant digestive issues, they simply can't do it. So we might also have them on the lower end of the protein spectrum just to get things going, just to provide them with some support while we work on some digestive strategies. On the other hand, I might have someone who has very little digestive issues and they tolerate protein digestion quite well. However, they could be struggling with poor energy, poor endurance, and fatigability with exercise. And so it's very possible that we could recommend for them that higher protein intake more along the lines of 1 gram per pound of ideal body weight. The point here is that one formula isn't more right or more magic than another. We adapt it to our needs and to our situation. And oftentimes, those recommendations will change for a particular individual as their symptoms improve and as their demands change. So be open to the idea of adaptation and don't feel like you have to pick the perfect formula for you for forever. So even though I try to keep things simple, you can see how it can easily get a bit complicated just with protein alone. However, once we start to build those habits and become more comfortable, that's where we can start to build a little bit of complexity and look at some of those other factors that are going to affect our nutrition and how we feel. As I've told you before, a common mistake that people make is thinking that high protein foods like meat are 100% protein. And they'll do things like weigh out 100 grams of chicken breast and assume that 100 grams of chicken equals 100 grams of protein. But the total weight of something, even something lean like chicken breast, isn't going to be entirely protein. The total weight will also include water and it will include fat. And fat is the variable that we want to take into consideration. Here's the thing. Sometimes I get people so focused on their protein intake that they forget about the fat. And while that might be helpful for us to get started in the beginning, it's another important variable that we might need to manipulate or tweak to make sure that it fits with the individual. Now, if you want to learn about what fats I think are the healthiest for us, you can check out the video that I recently did on the topic. But in today's video, we're going to mostly focus on the amount of fat that we're eating. So as a general rule, and when I say general rule, I mean just that, a general rule. And I freely admit that you might do better with more fat and you might do better with less fat. So don't come at me if this isn't exactly right. But typically speaking, I like my patients to have a protein intake that is 1.2 times greater than their fat intake when we're comparing grams. For example, an egg is a perfect demonstration of this. Typically, an egg has 6 grams of protein and 5 grams of fat. And when you take 5 and multiply it by 1.2, you get 6. And conversely, if you take 6 and reverse the equation and divide by 1.2, you get 5. So whether you know the amount of protein in your meal or the amount of fat in your meal, you can work from either side of the equation and get an estimate of what the other should be. Now, if we take that same egg, 6 grams of protein, 5 grams of fat, and calculate out the total amount of calories, we're going to multiply 6 by 4 because there's 4 calories per gram of protein, and we're going to multiply 5 by 9 because there's 9 calories per gram of fat. This gives us 24 calories from protein, 45 calories from fat, and a total of 69 calories. And although I've said before that I don't like people to use percentages to determine how much they should and shouldn't be eating and where their calories are coming from, and I still stand by that, by the way, if we take 24 calories from protein and divide it by the total of 69, we get about 34% of our calories coming from protein, and that puts us above the rough estimate of a minimum of 30% of our calories coming from protein, which is a number that we frequently see in the research and often tends to confer better health outcomes. Again, and I cannot stress this enough, but these types of calculations, whether it's the protein calculation or the fat in relation to protein, are just reference points. But sometimes we need that sort of structure when we're first getting started. But once you have that number in mind, here's a few things that you might have been struggling with that ideally this will help you to avoid. The first thing is fat digestibility. Now, when we have Hashimoto's and hypothyroidism, we know that decreases in metabolism can lead to changes in our capacity to digest food. This can be due to changes in motility, changes in the production of hydrochloric acid and digestive enzymes, and potentially changes to our microbiome. But specifically, when it comes to breaking down fat, we need to make sure that the acidity in our stomach is appropriate for us and that it is signaling to our gallbladder when bile needs to be released. If we don't have good gallbladder function, or maybe we've had our gallbladder removed, this can make it much harder for us to digest fats, especially in large quantities, and this can cause symptoms like nausea, bloating, digestive pain, and diarrhea. The problem that people will run into is that they get so focused on their protein goals and driving protein intake that they forget about the fat that comes with it. And if they're choosing a moderate or high fat item, it's very possible that in their attempt to get adequate protein, they take in an amount of fat that vastly exceeds their digestive capacity. And whether you have thyroid problems or not, having a healthy gut is integral to our health overall. And inducing irritation to the system, all in the name of trying to get more protein, is definitely not a swap that we want to make. So you might love things like pork belly, brisket, ribeye, and lamb chops. And I'm not saying that these are bad foods or that they can't be part of your diet. However, the reality is that they do have higher fat content. And while that might be good for some people, if your digestion can't tolerate that amount of fat, and because of the natural ratio of protein to fat, you can't hit your protein targets without consuming large amounts of fat, then you're going to want to look for different sources where that ratio is a little bit more favorable. The other mistake that people can make when it comes to fat intake revolves around calories. While I do think that most people aren't getting enough protein, you also can't rely on protein as your only source of calories. That means we have to round out our day and the rest of our caloric intake from carbohydrates and fats. And the combination that you do better with, whether it's high carb, low fat, high fat, low carb, or a mix of the two, is really going to depend on you and what makes you feel best. But the fact of the matter is, if your calories get too low, your diet isn't going to be sustainable. Your energy levels are going to tank, your sleep is going to suffer, and you're going to be hungry all the time. So for some people, making sure that they are getting enough fat is a great way to provide your body with the extra fuel that it needs to make sure that it has energy to get through the day. Remember, it's totally normal and fine to get hungry, but we don't want to be starving, and we don't want to get so hungry to the point where we start to notice an increase in symptoms in other parts of our physiology. Like I said, changes in energy, changes in sleep, having brain fog, or crashing in the afternoon. All of these can be great indicators that we're not fueling ourselves appropriately. On the flip side, it's also possible to go in the other direction and accidentally eat too much. I've said it before and I'll say it again, but even though calories aren't the whole picture when it comes to gaining and losing weight, they are something that we need to consider. And we don't want to forget about them just because we're focusing on our protein intake. For example, let's say that you wanted to have some pork belly for your breakfast. Now, 100 grams of pork belly is about 9 grams of protein and 53 grams of fat. But let's say that you're trying to get about 30 grams of protein with each meal, so you decide to triple that amount. Now, that sounds like an insane amount of pork belly to me, but just hang with me for the example. So if we triple that amount, now we're getting 27 grams of protein and 159 grams of fat. And when we calculate the calories that are associated with those numbers, that's 108 calories from protein, 1,431 calories from fat, for a total of 1,539 calories from one meal. Now again, I know this is a little outlandish and it might not be a perfect real world example, but these sort of things can happen even if it's on a lesser scale, and people struggle with it all the time. Now, like I said earlier in the video, keep in mind that some people do better with more fat. Their energy levels are more stable, and their hunger levels are much easier for them to manage. So sometimes having more fat with a meal or having more fat earlier in the day can then translate to them making better nutrition choices as the day goes on. But we still need that protein, we still need those amino acids for healing purposes, and we don't want too much fat to come at the expense of too little protein. But this is where I would refer you back to that ratio of 1.2 grams of protein per gram of fat. Use that as your reference point and adjust from there. Yes, context will have an impact, and there also will be individual variability. But if we can combine some of those numbers while also keeping the bigger picture in mind, we should be able to find a strategy that feels good and fits us well. But let me know what you think by leaving me a comment. Have you been working on your protein intake? And what sort of results have you seen? Have you sometimes ignored the amount of fat that you're eating in an effort to target protein? Does the concept of mixing the two together seem helpful? And what sort of changes is it going to inspire you to make? I can't wait to hear what you think and to continue the conversation. Also, if you like this video but know that you need more help and you're interested in working with me one-on-one, either virtually or in person, then you can start that process by sending an email to contact@seattlethyroidhelp.com. And if you need it again, it's also listed for you in the description box. Once we hear from you, my staff will reach out and see if you qualify for a free consultation. If you do, they'll help you to get scheduled, and you and I will sit down to discuss your health history, your health goals, and see if we're a good fit to work together. If you're not ready for a consultation at this time, but you want to keep learning, you can check out any of the other videos on my channel. You can grab either one of my free downloads listed in the description box, or you can follow me on social media, either Instagram or Facebook, where I post daily information and strategies. But that's it for today. Love you guys, hope you're well, and make sure to reach out if you have any questions. If you haven't done so, I always appreciate it if you can give the video a thumbs up and also subscribe to the channel. But my name is Dr. Bodle. I hope you guys have a great rest of your week, and I will see you in the next one.